Hello everyone, welcome back. So listen, this video is not going to be for everyone. This is kind of like the summation of 10 years worth of downloads that seem to be finally forming a cohesive picture. And it has to do with manifestation and manifestation protocols, right? And the number one epiphany that I've had in the last month, let's say, is that we in the spiritual community, in the woo-woo community, are very strongly encouraged to demonize the material world, right? And everything is contextualized as this battle between the material and the spiritual. So we're encouraged to demonize and divorce ourselves from the material and do everything that we can to move into the spiritual world. But the problem is that we mistake the mental world for the spiritual world. But the mental world, the mind, that is the thing that produces the simulation, right? Because it's like whatever it is that we're experiencing outside of ourselves, right? The scaffolding that we live inside of, for all intents and purposes, that seems to be neutral, right? But we show up with our color palette, our emotional color palette, the mind, and we fill it in based on what we expect to see, right? Based on our belief systems and our filters and our different parameters. But the mind is not the spiritual realm, and the material realm is not divorced from the spiritual realm. And here's what I mean by that. I wholeheartedly believe that this reality is, for lack of a better term, a dream that is taking place in the mind's eye of God. And therefore, the only substance in this reality that everything is made of is God. Period. There is no other substance. That's it. That's the fabric of the universe. That's every aspect of matter, every atom, every molecule is made of God. Period. So therefore, there is no distinction between the material world and the spiritual world. If anything, the material world is just a different aspect or layer of the spiritual world. And I would say the same thing about the mental world and the emotional world, right? They're not separate from the spiritual world, but they are layers on top of it, right? So when it comes to the material world, again, it's like everything encourages us to demonize that, right? That's where the devil lives, through your five senses and pleasure and taste, touch, smell, and feel. And if you like indulgent meals and velvet wallpaper and all of that, then you're a sinner, right? It's just stupid. But it's not just the New Age that encourages us to do this, right? It's like this was one of the rollover mind control traps that came from the classic religions, right? Because it seems like Christianity was one of the first ones to really lean into the demonization of the material world, right? And the reason why that was done is to basically convince poor people that are born into poverty that it's some sort of karmic curse and that they deserve it, right? And if they have any interest or desire in moving up and wanting nicer things, then that's just the devil, right? Because they don't deserve it. And that same thing has kind of been projected onto us and rolled over into the modern age, right? So we demonize sex, we demonize food, we demonize wealth, we demonize money, we demonize land, we demonize the body, right? There's even, quite a large spectrum of the New Age movement demonizes the body, right? And it's we're trying to get to the astral plane, or we're trying to get to the 5D, or we're trying to wake up in the pods, or whatever it is that we're trying to do. And all of this is mundane, right? It's the product of the demiurge, or whatever we want to call it. Whew, but what I have realized in the last month, especially, it's like that's when this culmination point has happened, is that in terms of this video game that we live inside of, the body, the physical body, is the controller that operates the game. You can call it the nervous system, the emotional body, the mind is a component of that, right? It's all working in tandem, but it's like this is the controller, this is the mechanism, the physical body. Therefore, accessing the spiritual and moving in a harmonious way with it, in a cohesive way with the spiritual, is not about rejecting the material. It's about connecting with it, right? Because again, there is no separation, right? There's this illusion of separation. I'll say that much, right? It's like there are a lot of things that have been corrupted within this matrix that are doing everything within their power to present as though they are separated from God or separated from spirit or artificial or whatever it may be. But the best example that I can give that neutralizes that entire concept is that there's nothing more quote unquote artificial than the digital world, right? Technology. And if we're going to try to identify anything within this matrix as being quote unquote godless or not of God, you could kind of look to the digital realm and technology and the internet and all of that as being that. But raise your hand if you have ever had a profound spiritual experience that came to you through the algorithm. A video that changed your life, a friend you made on the internet that changed your life, whatever it may be, right? Constant downloads, synchronicities, whatever you may call it. It came through the black mirror, it came through here, okay? So that would show me that there is absolutely no domain that spirit cannot access. Because if it wants to get the synchronicity to you, it's going to get the synchronicity to you. But the reason, so how I came to this whole idea that, the material is an incredibly important aspect of manifesting and having a cohesive experience in here, right? Because it's like at the end of the day, if I had to boil down my objective of like what it is that I'm trying to achieve for myself, I just want to live a peaceful life, right? You want to live a peaceful, sustainable life that allows for flexibility and freedom without exhaustion or stress, and where everything just kind of moves together harmoniously and cohesively without resistance or turbulence or anything like that. It's like that's the simplest way to describe my idea of paradise. And I think we're all moving towards the same thing, right? But again, the question is how, right? And for the last decade, I feel like my assumption is that the how is by detaching from the material world and going into the mind, right? So again, how I came to this whole thing in the last month is that I was really reflecting on the concept of the hermit, right? Like the hermit in tarot. And the hermit usually talks about that energy of detachment, right? Where it's like you're in it but not of it, or you're over it but not in it. You're withdrawn, you're in the internal world as opposed to the external world, right? So back in the day, in antiquity, the hermits were these mystics that were trying to reconnect to what they could call the primal current, right? So if you want to think, it's like in most mythologies, they all agree that there was this golden age, right? The before times, the Saturnian era, way back in the day, where everything was peaches and cream, everybody lived in harmony, everything kind of moved perfectly and cohesively. We may not have had free will, but it's like, it was a quote unquote paradise. It was Eden, right? And then something happened, shit went left, and it's like that entire network became destabilized, right? So the thing that allowed us to communicate with nature, to communicate with animals and the birds and understand the language of the wind or whatever it was, it's like we lost all of that, right? And we went from this cohesive system to this fractalized system, right? So the hermits, what they were trying to do, or what they were doing successfully, is they were leaving society, they were leaving the village, they were leaving the city, and going into the most desolate remote region that they could find. And when I say desolate, I mean mountaintops and deserts and places where it seems like there wasn't even much vegetation or water or anything like that, right? And they would be there for an extended period, right? The 40 days and nights or whatever, probably, tripping on God knows what kind of psychedelics, and fasting and yada yada, with the intention of basically disconnecting from you could call it, the demiurge system, the illusion system that seems to have kicked in when the golden age collapsed, right? Because it's like there was the golden age, everything was cohesive, we were on that network, we can call it the cohesive network, that collapsed, then all of a sudden we have this problematic network that shows up. And the hermits were doing everything they could to disconnect from the problematic network and reconnect to the original primal current, right? And this is memorialized in alchemical scripts as trying to learn the language of the birds, or the green language. And the language of the birds, or the green language, would be the ability to basically, have a Dr. Dolittle kind of experience where you're communicating with every aspect of reality, the elementals, yada yada. And the only way that they could do this, it seemed, was through these extreme rituals of detachment and divorcing themselves from reality and yada yada yada. And I was reflecting on this concept, and the one thing about it is that it's like, it just doesn't seem like a sustainable protocol, right? I cannot imagine that an omnipotent God that is all-knowing, that has the wisdom of the Sophia, that can put all of this together, would say that that's the only way to execute this protocol, is to remove yourself and live in the woods for 40 days and nights, eating nothing but magic mushrooms, shitting your brains out, right? And then at some point, all of a sudden you reconnect to the Wi-Fi. It's like that doesn't seem like the way. And I think at one point in history it was. So let me kind of backtrack. I was saying in the beginning, I have a diagram for y'all. In the beginning, this thing that looks like a solar system, let's pretend that this is a map of the Earth, right? This is one network. This is the Saturnian age. Everybody's on this one network operating cohesively. It's the golden age, the land before time, Eden, everything is peaches, great. Something goes left, shit goes left, and the whole thing fractalizes. On the other side of the fractalization, what we have are, let me just show, all of these different local networks that start popping up. Local pantheons, local gods, local egregores and tulpas, and fractalized systems that are not cohesive, right? So you can have some sort of magical protocol, manifestation protocol that works over here, but it doesn't work over here, right? And elementals that are at war with each other, and yada, yada, yada. So if you know anything about elemental magic, or creating servitors, tulpas, egregores, thought forms, gods, whatever, it's a tricky and dangerous thing, because if you create these things, if you initiate them, you need to know how to also shut them down. Because if you don't shut them down properly, they just go rogue and they go crazy, right? So what I think wound up happening is, by the time we got to the year 0, which would be, when Christ shows up, and the Mithras and the Abraxas and all of these other patches that are getting thrown into the system, it's kind of like the entire network looked like this. Just an absolute shit show mess of localized networks that were not compatible with each other. Thought forms that had run rogue, legacy programs that had basically outlived the creator being that created them, right? So nobody could shut it off. And you had basically an impossible system that you could not manifest inside of, right? Just like a yarn ball. Now, this is where, again, this video ain't for anybody, and it just is what it is, but if you pick up what I'm putting down, then you pick it up. Speaking of which, I just dropped my cards on the floor, so let's get those. Okay. So, we're in this shithole mess, right? Fractalized, localized system, tulpas and egregores that are all at war with each other, that are now demanding worship and stuff like that in order to keep themselves alive, right? A computer that's gone completely rogue. Around the year 0, this protocol shows up, a patch that's designed to patch this together, that eventually turned into the archetype that we know of as Jesus, right? But it would be like the Christ operating system, the Christ consciousness, whatever. And what this thing did was stabilize the matrix. That's what the mystery of the crucifixion is all about. The patch was entered into the system, and it just stabilized all of these thought forms, right? So it would identify legacy programs that had gone rogue, right? Servitors that did not have an operator inside of the matrix, and it would neutralize those things, right? And basically, the Christ archetype shows up as like what you could call like the chief operator within the matrix that would have the ability to identify which of these programs have gone rogue and yada, yada, yada. Now, this is the same image as the tetramorph. So let's find that in the tarot, because the tetramorph is something that shows up on the wheel card and the world card. And this was the original symbol for what you could call proto-Christianity before it was completely warped and manipulated and destroyed by the church, which is just a heresy and a fiction. But hold on, I just want to find the world card. Is she in here? There she is. Okay. So here we go. We got the world and the wheel of fortune. And then my jumbled mess, right? So this is the matrix with all these fractalized, localized networks. And then this patch comes in, which you could call the Christ OS, whatever, comes in and stabilizes it. It's the same thing that's depicted here, right? So you have the 4 elements in the corner of each of these cards, the world and the wheel. These 4 images, they're called the tetramorph, right? So the earliest depictions of Christ would show either an angel or a cross or a plus sign or an X between these 4 elementals, right? So you have Leo, Taurus, I forget what the other ones are, but you know what I'm saying. The fixed elemental signs of the zodiac, right? So the fixed elemental signs are going to be the most stable. And again, this system that was introduced was all about introducing a stability patch. I don't know how else to say it, right? So that's the ancient era, right? Now we're in the modern era. And it seems like the system right now is different than the system that was introduced back in the day. And if you know anything about the little season rabbit hole, this kind of plays into that. So the little season rabbit hole is basically, if you're familiar with the book of Revelation, right? The book of Revelation is the thing that has the tribulation and the seals, and we're waiting for the Antichrist and the Armageddon and yada yada. So most people assume that we are at the beginning of the book of Revelation, right? And we're waiting for the tribulation, or we're in the middle of it. We're waiting to figure out who the Antichrist is. We're waiting for Armageddon and the third temple and all that other nonsense. Then there's another group of people called the biblical preterists who believe that we are at the end of the book of Revelation, and that shit already happened thousands of years ago. Interesting. I did not know about this until relatively recently in the last year. So, according to that book, which I do believe is a script that they run by, but that's another conversation. According to that book, the second coming happens, the resurrection happens, and then there's this period called the 1,000 years of peace, where everything is peachy and good for like 1,000 years. Then there's this moment called the little season, where for whatever reason, Christ releases the great Satan back into the construct for, one final hurrah before he's finally smited once and for all, and it's just eternal peace from there on out. But of course the question is, why the F would anybody think that that's a good idea, right? It's like, if Jesus had successfully resurrected, not just himself, but everybody else, then why are we letting Satan do one more victory lap when he's already lost? And why do we have a second resurrection that coincides with that? Now, way back in the day, Dolores Cannon, in one of her books, I think it was one of the Convoluted Universe books, posted a QHHT session with a client where she regresses this client back to the day of the fall, right? The fall of mankind, when the original system went left and allowed for all of this bullshit to populate. And what this woman said was that the day of the fall, as soon as the system began destabilizing, it locked all of the doors to the matrix so we couldn't get out, and anybody who would try to unplug themselves and exit would be sent to what she called these crystal hard drives, that there were these crystal hard drives in the earth. But unfortunately, it's like there was a short window of time for people to actually access the crystal hard drives. And if you were too late on the game on that, you got locked out of those as well, and you were basically trapped on the surface, right? So there were 2 groups of dead, the dead in the crystal hard drives and the dead that were trapped on the surface. In the book of Revelation, there are 2 groups of dead that resurrect, the dead in Christ and the rest of the dead. So I believe that the dead in Christ that resurrected first during the 1,000 years of peace were the dead in the crystals that QHHT, that Dolores Cannon was talking about. The rest of the dead is everybody that was stuck on the surface that experienced the illusion of separation, right? So those that made it into the crystal hard drives, they were still traumatized, but they were in relatively good shape. Those that did not make it into the crystal hard drives that were stuck on the surface experienced the illusion of separation from God and experienced the absolute worst of the nightmare realm, right? The world that was built during the 1,000 Years of Peace, which we could call the Tartarian era, right? That world was designed for the first group of the dead, to rehabilitate them, to clean them up, to bring them back into cohesion, whatever it is. This world was designed for the rest of the dead. But the patch that was installed originally it's not that it doesn't apply, it's still running in the background. But there's something about the parameters of this reality that is also kind of allowing the demiurge system to run as well. And this is what I mean by that. This kind of represents, this fractalized image, represents the mind of the rest of the dead. Now, it reminds me of, in the Matrix movies, when Neo meets the architect tells him that the first Matrix that he designed was a paradise realm, but that their minds couldn't handle it and they rejected it. So that's why he eventually created what looked like, New York in the 21st century, because that was basically what people could accept as reality the most. So, excuse me. And I'm also noticing too that this kind of looks like a crown of thorns, right? When I think about it, but we'll save that for another video, another day. So it seems like the patch that was good for the first group of the dead is not the same patch that is good for the second group of the dead. And here's what I mean by that, is that if we want to use the word like the Christ operating system, or maybe to keep it neutral, we can call it the coherence system. I think that that's possibly a little bit more accessible for people, the coherence system. The flaw in the coherence system, if you want to call it that, is that it doesn't force people to do anything, right? It can find unlawful programs and deactivate them, but in terms of like forcing you against your free will to do the right thing, it's like, that is just tyranny, right? It's like, that is just the demiurge system pretending to be the Christ system, which is literally what it's doing, right? It's like, look at the Catholic Church. That is the demiurge system pretending to be the Christ system by forcing people to comply, right? Conversion by the sword. Whereas this, the true, genuine Christos patch, it's like, it's giving people the choice, effectively, right? And it's like, look at the realm that we're in. It is incredibly normalized right now to be an atheist, right? I think if I went to a dinner party of people my age or younger, I'm 35, 34, and say it was a dinner party of a dozen people, I think it would be a lot more likely that there would be people at the table who identify themselves as atheists than there would be people who identify themselves as Christians or something like that, right? And I say that to say that in any other incarnation in history where we had this localized system, you could not transfer your beliefs from one place to another, right? You could not live in the Holy Roman Empire and practice paganism, right? You would be burned at the stake, right? But nowadays, it's like there are people who are open Satanists, open Wiccans, open Norse god people. I don't know, what would you call that? Nordics, something like that. And this really is the first time in history that we can kind of play dress up with all of these different thought forms and systems and fictions that have been created, right? But it is literally a maze. So I do believe that the world that we're in today, with the internet, right, with the ability to literally access mountains of information in seconds, right, to expedite the process, that we've been given this opportunity to basically play Goldilocks in all of these different belief systems in order to find ourselves, right? In a very Ruby Slippers kind of way, right? Realizing that the shoes are on your feet the whole time and yada, yada. And I think we've all done it, right? It's like, I think most of us grew up in the Western world, which means that most of us were probably raised in some sort of pseudo-Christian system. Most of us probably rejected that or lapsed out of it at some point because of the institution, right? Not because of the archetypes or the characters, but because of the institution that was utilizing those masks, right? Like wearing Jesus as a mask. So we rejected that system because of it. Most people, I think, swing out of the Western into the Eastern systems, right? And we explore that, and then we come back to the ancient systems and the paganism, and we explore all of that. And now it seems like everyone has kind of made their way or is making their way to this thing that kind of sort of looks like Christianity more so than anything else, but within the context of simulation theory and game theory and the holographic universe and the Sophia, right? But not exactly Gnostic, right? So it's like there is something new that is being developed. And what I believe we are doing here in this reality as the active players, the programmers, the volunteers, whatever you want to call it, we are actively programming the new patch. Because again, it's like, let's talk about the real true tenets of the Christ system. It's not trying to destroy anything. It is trying to reintegrate everything, right? Everything became fractalized. And in the fractalized state, all of these fictions came out. But there's still kernels of truth in every single one of these systems, right? So it's like the ultimate goal is to just bring it into coherence, right? So one example would be something like money or technology, right? With technology, for example, it's like you can do good things and bad things with that, right? It's absolutely possible that we could integrate this into the system in a coherent way that still acts lawfully, right, within the divine context, is still acting lawfully and respecting free will and yada yada, and not forcing anyone into like a slave system, right? The same thing could be said with money, right? Money is absolutely a neutral force. People can do bad things with it, but it's like, I think if there is an omni intelligence that's running this, right, a God level intelligence, I'm sure that God level intelligence recognizes that money is an aspect of our reality that we need to survive, right? So it's not going to punish us for wanting that in order to survive, right? That's crazy. But the Christ OS that was developed for, 2,000 years ago, if we want to say that, did not include a money provision. It basically assumed that everything would be kumbaya, right? That the village would take care of itself, that you wouldn't need money because everything was working so cohesively. That's where I think the patch is still effective and it still stabilizes things. But when it comes to abundance, this kind of echoes back to the last video that I posted about the idea of the cosmic Black American Express card, right? That it's like, it seems like we have a lot of trouble as manifestors. We can manifest anything, but money is one thing that it seems like it's hard to manifest. But you can manifest experiences, right? So that's where I was saying having the karmic black card, it's like, if you want something, you can have the thing without the money, but that's because of, again, the Christ OS that kind of assumes that the community is going to support the vision, right? And that there's going to be this kind of communal experience that brings it together, right? So it's like, if you have your eyes on going to a particular concert, someone in the community reaches out and says, hey, I have an extra ticket, do you want to go, right? Something like that. Now, in terms of the money of it all, right? So that's where I think we need to address the fact that we demonize the material world, and we need to recognize that matter is spirit and that God moves through all things, including the digital realm, right? So there's nothing that is separated from God. That needs to be like established first and foremost in order to work with any of these things, right? Because if you're identifying something as being separate from God, then it's separate from you, right? And if it's separate from you, then you're not cohesive with it, you can't work with it. Duh, that kind of makes sense, right? And I think that it seems like it's designed that way, right? Like at the mouth of the rabbit hole, when people wake up, the first thing that they're encouraged to demonize is money, right? And what I've noticed, the pattern is that it's like as soon as you bite from the apple of the forbidden tree, right? It's like your eyes wake up to the evil of the system and the system no longer works for you, right? I think that we are all already tethered to this Christ OS, at least anybody watching this video, not to say that some people are not, but it's like, what I mean by that is like, if you're actively tethered to this, you'll know, because you will be absolutely incompatible with false things, right? It's like this coherence mechanism is identifying things that are not true, not objectively true, whatever it may be. So what I mean by that is like, I'm sure you found yourself in customer service positions where you've had to sell something, right? Whether it was at a restaurant or a store. And I'm sure you've had the experience where it's like, you just cannot bring yourself to sell something that does not have integrity. You can't do it, right? It's just like, in the same respect, I'm sure you've had plenty of experiences in work environments where you show up, there is a status quo, you identify something as being incoherent, fractalized, false, demiurgic, whatever. You don't say anything about it. You don't blow the whistle. You just notice it. And then all of a sudden, within 24 hours of your noticing, the entire paradigm seems to collapse and shift to kind of respond to what it is that you've seen, right? So that is, to me, evidence that we've been tethered to this thing, and it explains why we're not exactly, why we have trouble kind of integrating or working with these demiurgic false paradigms, right? But what we are trying to do is extract the truth from it so that it can all be cohesive once again, right? Because it's like we're developing a new patch, right? So if the Christ OS was the patch that was developed 2,000 years ago, it's like this is the 2.0, right? We're developing the 2.0 that's going to stabilize this system once and for all, but integrate the aspects of reality that we need right now, right? It's like we live in a capitalistic society. We have money, we have material things. That's okay, as long as we can stabilize it and get it to all work coherently. So another thing about the coherence is that in terms of the role that we play within the matrix, I think that that role is shifting. And for the most part, up until now, we've been in this kind of detached flow state, right? So it's like all of the systems, whether it's the new age or the old age, they've all encouraged us to detach from the material, to reject the money, to reject the physical, to reject the five senses, to see it all as sinful, and to get lost in the mind, right? And when you get lost in the mind, that's when you create really powerful holograms that you then have to work against, right? And everything is given an emotional charge, right? Money has a very big emotional charge. Success, material things, life in general, right? Love, romance, there's these big emotional charges, good, bad, ugly, everything. And for the most part, it seems like those of us that are heavily tethered to the Christ OS, the active players, the volunteers, people that would be looking for this type of content on the internet, we want to be in a service to others kind of mentality. And that works when you're tethered to the Christ OS if you are a monk living in a monastery that's living off of the provisions of the congregation, right? Like the congregation is bringing food to the monks and clothing and whatever it is they need so that they can be sustained, right? That's how the Christ OS is supposed to work. We are not monks living in a monastery. We are not waiting for the charity of the neighborhood to pay our rent, right? We need to do that ourselves. But we are still in that service to others mentality, right? And this does not force anything upon anyone, right? So if it's reading us as just wanting to serve, right? To be a server, to be in service, to be in hospitality, whatever it may be, just wanting to serve, then it sees us, if you think of it in terms of water, right? Currency is water. It sees us as like a flowing thing, like a creek or a brook or a river, as opposed to a stationary thing, like a pond or a lake or a reservoir or an ocean or a sea, right? So if we want to accumulate wealth, for lack of, literally, we want to accumulate wealth, right? You have to switch from basically, like, rivers would be tributaries, right? Paying tribute to others. You have to move from the tributary state to the reservoir state, and identify yourself as a reservoir, not just a tributary. Because that's effectively what we've been acting as. Servers, if you think of it in the computer context, servers are like routers, right? We are just routing the energy through ourselves, right? So the resources don't stay, the money doesn't stay, the legacy doesn't stay, the power doesn't stay, those things don't stay. They all get rerouted to other people that have identified themselves as node points and are much more localized, right? So the beauty of being a tributary that's in this service state is that you are incredibly fluid, right? You can kind of navigate all of these different spaces within the matrix and be somewhat of a shapeshifter in this, that, and the third. And the key to identifying yourself as a reservoir state and being a reservoir is that you do have to have an identity, right? So it's like a reservoir would have an IP address. It's a localized identity. A tributary might not have an IP address. A tributary is almost like operating on a VPN, right? Where it's like you're not really seen and you're just kind of passing through all of these other networks. But what we need to recognize is that a reservoir is still nourishing the community, right? The community, the entire community is drinking from the reservoir, but the reservoir stays full, right? And the reservoir itself is feeding numerous other tributaries, right? So it's like you're still acting in coherence with the Christ OS. Now you're just allowing yourself to build because you are identifying yourself as a localized identity. You're identifying yourself as a stationary IP address that can receive things, right? It's like the difference between the bank account and the wire that transfers everything between the accounts, right? It's like we have been the wire up until now. But one of the reasons why we've been the wire is because we've detached ourselves from the material, right? We've demonized the material. It's like the material is at war with the spiritual, and we seek the spiritual, so then we get lost in the mind, right? But the mind is incredibly detached from the matter, right? So the goal is to integrate all of these things and recognize that the matter is spiritual. The mind is spiritual. The matter is the mind, the emotional body, yada, 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 bringing all of these things together, right? But the key with money in particular, especially with money, is that the way that tulpa or egregore or whatever it was created, is that you cannot approach money with an emotional charge, right? And this is where I think a lot of the manifestors get fucked up, because they identify that we demonize money, but then they encourage you to obsess and love money. And it's like the polarity thing, right? It's like the demonization is just the polarity of the obsession. And they're the same exact frequency, and both of them kind of push the money away. Now, the best example that I can think of to really kind of grip this is that it's like, think about famous people and the people that they choose to be their friends. Famous people don't want somebody who's really thirsty in their environment, right? Because that destabilizes the entire environment, makes it weird. The famous person doesn't like that, right? But of course, they also don't want somebody in there with animosity towards them, right? So it's like either of those things, the animosity or the obsession, are problematic for the famous person, the powerful person, the important person, whatever it may be. They don't even have to be famous, right? It's like, could just be somebody that you have a crush on, right? It's like if you're just bugging out in their presence because you're obsessed with them like a fangirl, it's going to push that individual away, right? It does the same thing for money. Money likes chill. Money likes when you don't really think about it. Not like don't think about it, but money likes when you have this kind of like neutral, even keel kind of relationship with it, where you just think of it as an elemental process. And what I mean by that is, say these things out loud with me. The sky is blue. Water is wet. Fire is hot. Say your name. Right? Those are objective statements. There are very few truly objective statements in this reality. Those are a few of them. And when you say them, there's no emotional charge. There's no emotional charge with the sky is blue. It just is. It's blue. Duh. That's how you have to treat money. I'm always making money. I always have money. It should have the same emotional charge as the sky is blue. And that's the hack. The other thing, though, is that energy flows where attention goes. So you have to be in the material world, of the material world, with the material world in order to get that to come back to you and co-create with you, right? Energy flows where attention goes. If you want a thriving garden, right, a garden that feeds you 365 days a year, then you're gonna need to be in the dirt just about every single day, right? That's the only way that you have a thriving garden. You are out there picking weeds, watering, building little scaffoldings for your tomato plants. You're doing all that. You have to do the same thing with your checkbook. Your checkbook is your garden, right? I was reading something recently at the last month that unlocked this, and it was a story about, I want to say it was the Rockefeller children. It was one of those dynastic satanic families where I think it was one of the Rockefellers, and they were being interviewed, and the interviewer was asking them how that family managed to hold on to its wealth, whereas so many other families just kind of faded into obscurity and blew everything within a generation or two. And the Rockefeller was saying that all of the children, as soon as they could read and write, were given an allowance and a checkbook. And every single day, at the end of the day, they had to sit down and balance the checkbook and account for every single penny and see where it was moving and do. And that clicked something in me. Energy flows where attention goes. Everybody that I know that has really good luck with money operates like that, where it's like they know where every penny is. And I remember I used to work for a woman, and she herself was relatively wealthy, but she had a lot of brothers and sisters. And her eldest brother, who was the wealthiest, she used to tell me this story where he would do the same thing with his checkbook, and he would balance it down to the penny. And if he was off by a penny, he would go through the entire checkbook again. And he was a millionaire, right? So it would be tremendous amounts of transactions that he would have to go through. But he was like anal about that. And I believe that that's one of the reasons why he was able to accumulate so much. It's energy flows where attention goes. It's the fact that, yes, the garden is thriving because I did all of the gardening, but it's also thriving because I gave it so much love and attention, right? It's like the difference between good parenting and bad parenting, right? It's like you can give somebody a lot of parenting, but does that also include attention, right? An actual acknowledgement and love and care and consideration, right? Because it's like when you're balancing that checkbook down to the penny and you need to find that penny, it's because you care about that penny, right? It's not okay if it disappears, right? And I'm saying this just because it's like, because of my own demonization towards money since the day one of waking up, I haven't cared about where that penny went. I was indifferent. Money? I'm like, money's not even real, right? And I'll just say, as somebody who played with that fire, I did get burned. So all things considered, balance your checkbooks, be okay with the material world. And the material world is the access point, right? It's like you need to be in your body and not in your head as much as possible, which I know kind of sounds antithetical to everything else that I've ever said, honestly, and everything else that I've ever practiced, honestly. But I was doing a string of readings over the last couple of months where it's like there was this contradictory advice that was coming out where it was talking about, it was typically like the Knight of Wands would come out, and the Knight of Wands talks about acting on impulse, right? Where it's just like the idea comes up, the feeling comes up, and you act on it. And it was typically being paired with something like swords, right? Like Six of Swords, Knight of Swords, something like that, which is typically a very clear, defined plan of how I'm going to approach this, right? And to me, these cards were contradictory because I would think of impulse as just being random, and I'm like, well, why would you just act without thinking about it first, right? But it's like what the cards were trying to tell me is that it's like you have your destination, your goal, your destiny in mind, right? That's the swords, the defined thing that you're trying to move towards. But the reason why the Knight of Wands and acting on impulse was coming up is because what I realized is that I'll have my download, I'll have my epiphany, I'll have my impulse, and then instead of acting upon it, I think about it. And I get caught in the mind and I will think myself stupid. And then never take the action, and the thing never manifests, and the waveform just collapses. And it seems like the problem with the thinking is that because the thinking is so tied to the emotional body, that when we add these strong polarized emotional charges to the intention collapses, right? It seems like every system of magic, it doesn't matter what system you are working with, encourages you to like write down your intentions, develop your sigil, do your thing, go into your, ecstatic state and add it to the core code, and then forget about it, right? Burn the sigil, lose the paper, forget about the operation, and move forward so that it can manifest, right? Because it's like the more you think about it, the more emotional energy you add. Oh, it has to happen. I hope it happens. Like, if it doesn't, what if it does? Do I need to do more? You collapse the waveform each time. Everything that I've manifested, which is so funny, right? Because it's like I've spent the last 20 years of my life studying manifestation protocols, trying to figure it out. And the most success I've ever had has been through the moments where it's like you just have a passing thought and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's how it's going to be. And then boom, it happens, right? And it's the same thing with like anti-manifestation, where it's like, things have come across the wire, where I remember there was like this big event once that this company wanted me to do. And they basically presented this idea to me about the role that I was going to play in it regarding tarot and this, that, and the third. And I remember just seeing it. I'm like, yeah, that's not happening. There's no energy behind it. And it didn't happen, right? And it goes both ways, right? Where it's like, it kind of reminds me like in Genesis, in the very beginning, literally, when they're saying, in the beginning, God created the earth and he did this, that, and the third. At the end of each day, God looks at his creation and says, it's good, and then walks away from it. And there's something about that is kind of like the key to the crystallization of things. And I almost wonder if that's the other end of my not on my timeline protocol. I'm sure if you watch my videos, you've heard me say that, or balance is restored, right? That's a better one. Balance is restored, where I talk about dropping the iced coffee and it shatters, and declaring that that's a good thing, because in your mind's eye that you've been anticipating a tower moment, right? Because we do it to ourselves all the time. We get lost in the mind, we think too much, we anticipate the tower, and then the system does us a favor, right? The coherent system, the Christ OS that's still running under all of this demiurge mess, and it does everything within its power to allow that thought form to expel itself through the path of least resistance, which is dropping the iced coffee or dropping your phone, or whatever it may be that experiences the tower, right? And in that moment, you can say, balance is restored, right? But in the same respect, when good things happen that you want more good of that to happen, did I articulate that well? When good things happen that you would like to see happen again, it's not just balance is restored, but it is good, right? It seems like that's the affirmation that God uses when he manifests something successfully. He looks at it and he says, it's good. Now, when Jesus is doing his exorcism work or whatever, and going all around the Levant, exercising that place, could have done a little bit more, I'll tell you that much, but that's another story for another day. His magic words are, peace be upon you, or peace be with you. Funny how I say that and make the peace sign, right? So if you encounter resistance or some sort of force that's presenting as an adversary, the illusion of separation, right? The neutralization is, peace be with you, peace be upon you. When the good things happen, you say it's good. When the bad things happen, you say, balance is restored, thank goodness. Now I can move on. I don't have to worry about that anymore. When it comes to the money, the sky is blue, I have money. Water is wet, I have money. Fire is hot, I have money. Always, right? When it comes to accessing the spiritual, The spiritual is here in the physical world. This is Eden. This is it. There is no other Eden, right? We're not going to Mars. 3i Atlas did not stop to pick us up. But guess what? You're still a divine creature. You're still a child of God. You're still a manifester. You still live in a very magical world. This is the new earth, 100%. But it's just a matter of allowing it to be the new earth. And that is the other aspect of this system, right? Is that it's like, even if things are presenting as though they are separated from God because they've chosen to do that, they are still tethered to the network. There is no other substance in this reality, right? There's nothing else. So that means that this truly is, we are inside of Solomon's temple, right? The Solomon's temple mythos, where it's like, you have to get the daemon to work for you, right? It's like the daemon are the thought forms, right? The Solomon's temple is the mind, right? The minds of Solomon. This is what he was at battle with, right? This is the seat of Satan. I'll tell you that much. Between your two ears, that's the seat of Satan, period. Are there things outside of us that try to act as though yada, yada, yada? Yes, absolutely. But only if we affirm that power is it given to them. Period. Right? Have you ever laughed at someone that tried to be serious with you and completely destabilized them because it humiliated the fact that they don't have power? The entire system operates like that. The entire system. And the other example would be, it's like the demiurge system tries to present as difficult. You call up the phone company or the utility company or the Medicare company, whatever it is, and you have to go through the carousel of bullshit, right? Press 1 for this, press 3 for that. But I didn't hear that. Can you repeat that? And you get caught in the labyrinth, right? But where there's a will, there's a way. And I'll tell you what, you've all experienced it too. The first honey tells you no, the second honey tells you yes and does exactly what you need to do. Same system. What changed? You didn't accept it as reality. You said, not on my timeline. You said there is no resistance. You said that's not true. What is true is that this absolutely can work for me. And that's why you were able to get through to the second person that gave you the answer that you wanted, right? That's how you were able to get through the carousel and find what actually worked, right? You could effectively say that this Christ consciousness operating system is almost like Ariadne's thread, right? Where it's like pulling us through the maze. But it needs to be affirmed. It needs to be understood that, call it what you want to call it, God, Jesus, Sophia, it does not matter. It would love to see you rich and happy. It would love to see that. It don't care. Do you really think it cares? Right? Now, does it want to see you rich and happy with slaves that you treat like shit? Hell no. It don't need to be like that though. Right? There are absolutely ethical ways to live quite luxurious lifestyles ethically. And that's the only kind of lifestyle that you would ever want to live. And that's what you're trying to live, right? But you just need to deactivate the program that says that comfort is incompatible with integrity. Because that's bullshit. And that is the issue with this mess. It tells us that comfort is incompatible with integrity. And if you desire comfort, then that's because the devil is working through you, girl. You know what I'm saying? But it's like, no, I would just really like a nice outfit. Because that's how I glorify the majesty of God. And I mean that literally and not as a joke, right? Where it's like, if anything was given to us by God, it was the intelligence to create beautiful things, to make beautiful meals out of different ingredients, to build majestic buildings out of natural materials. That's what God put us here to do. He said, listen, I gave you this garden. This is the most that physics will allow. I can do a lot of crazy shit, but I can't build a skyscraper. Okay? I can't just grow a skyscraper, right? So I need y'all for that. That's what he created us for. To take all of these materials and do something cool with them and something beautiful with them. And if you want to appreciate those things, then you are honoring God. Appreciating beautiful things, indulging in an Epicurean lifestyle, loving the material world, loving everything that comes through your five senses, having a love affair with the material world is exactly what God wanted you to do. to hide inside of your head and divorce yourself from society and starve yourself of stimulation is not what God wants from any of us. That is antithetical. That's what the demiurge system wants from you, because then you're not messing with it. Then you're just very easy to control, right? For as long as, as long as we stay on that carousel, we are very easy to control. Oh, and now the dogs are barking. I remember, I forget who it was. There was a woman years ago that would talk about the holographic universe, and she would say that one of her signs that the Matrix just updated is that she'll hear a dog barking in the distance, right? And that's just like her own personal protocol, but that's the beauty of this system, right? The beauty of the demiurge mess is that it does allow you to develop whatever it is that works for you to get out of here, right? Like the chaos magic idea of nothing is true and everything is permitted, right? That doesn't mean that heinous crimes are permitted. What that means is that there's no such thing as objective truth in this reality, right? Aside from like maybe the sky is blue, but we could still debate on that, right? But in terms of belief systems of magic and religion and God and all of that, it's like there's no objective truth. We can all debate on all of these different things. And nothing is true, all is permitted. What is permitted is what you believe to be true, right? So if you just listen to all of this and you don't think any of that's going to be true, then it's not going to work for you. If this resonated and you're like, oh, that makes sense, then congratulations, you just found a new system that works for you. That's why it's like, it doesn't matter which sandbox you play in. It doesn't matter which belief system you try on. If you believe that there's something in that belief system, it's going to work for you, right? If you think sigils work, they're going to work. If you don't think sigils work, they're not going to work, right? Because nothing is true and technically all is permitted by you, right? You are the one that gives the permission slip to these different belief systems to work, right? So if you believe that the material world is your enemy and does not work with you, only works against you, that money is evil and that if you want it, that's a lack of integrity that you deserve to be punished for, well then congratulations, you just built yourself a hell of a belief system, right? But if you believe that you are God's trust fund baby, and he just wants to see you have a good time and make the most of it, then congratulations again, because you just developed your Ariadne's thread that's going to pull you out of this. And one thing I will say, if you're trying to get into the body and love the physical world, dance. That's the number one. Dance. Put on your playlist, and you got to wiggle it all. From your toes to your fingertips to your ears, every muscle on your body needs to be moving. And then you just lose yourself in the music. And that's how the spirit re-enters the body. And from there, it's like, quite literally, it feels like walking on water. It's like having a hyper-lucid experience here in the Matrix. And that's the tea, right? Is that it's like we want to be aware of what's happening around us. When you get lost in the mind, you become kind of blind to things that are happening around you. That's at least what I noticed, right? Is that it's like I could very easily turn my apartment into a depression cave if I wanted to, that's just filled with, junk and water bottles and socks on the floor or whatever, because I get so lost in my head that I'm actually blind to the environment that I'm creating, right? But when I'm in that active state, when I feel like I'm in the body and actually working with it, I don't allow those things to happen because I see it, I'm aware of it, and it's like I need to bring it into coherence. It just bothers me if I actually see it. But if I'm lost in the mind, I don't see it and I don't care. So I think I'm going to leave it on that. I love you guys. I hope to see you very soon. If you're interested in a private reading, I am still doing them. So come through. Thank you to everyone who has purchased a private reading as well. I hope that those are working for you guys. And I'll see you later. Bye, y'all.